Hi, today I want to talk to you a little bit about anxiety during sex or intimacy. So if you're having intimate relationships or you're having anxiety around even having intimate relationships, what does that look like and how do we take care of it?
Sex talk.
So a lot of people experience anxiety around sexuality, around relationships, around intimacy, and there are many, many reasons for that. One of the main reasons that I come across in my practice with my clients is that they've been spoon-fed a lot of stories about sex and sexuality and what it's supposed to be and what it's supposed to look like. And a lot of that is false, but really what happens is it really makes people second guess their own intuition when it comes to human sexuality, when it comes to their relationships, when it comes to performance. So for example, you probably have heard about erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation. You've probably heard about anorgasmia, or as I like to call it, pre-orgasmia, which means someone that has never experienced an orgasm yet. Anorgasmia means they've never experienced, they're aorgasmic, like they're not going to have an orgasm. But that's not true. I like to say pre-orgasmic, because you can always have one. A lot of things that trip us up around these issues around sex are up here. Sometimes there are medical issues, there's no doubt about it, and they can contribute to the inability to have orgasms or they can contribute to the feelings of anxiety, worry, stress, nervousness that people experience around sexuality because maybe they have an illness or something that hasn't been treated or that is under treatment. Certain types of medications can also cause discrepancies in your arousal and in your desire. So there's definitely a lot of different reasons that are more organic when it comes to feeling this inability to engage sexually. But this particular video, I really want to focus on anxiety around sexual situations, your own sexuality, intimacy. This can also affect dating. If you are anxious about sex, then you're probably going to be more avoidant when it comes to dating and getting out there and dating. So I think it's really an important conversation to have. In therapy, typically what we do is we begin to peel back the layers of what has happened for you. So what kind of stories have you held on to that you learned from a young age about sex that make you scared to engage in intimate relationships? That's my cat, Azzy. Azzy, say hi to the camera. The other thing is when we hear these stories, particularly when we're younger, we tend to internalize them. So we've grown up with a lot of myths and stories, particularly if we were raised religious. There is a lot of what we call religious trauma, which basically many religions really encourage abstinence, really frown on masturbation, really frown on premarital sex, really frown on just having conversations around sex. So if you grew up in that environment where you were shamed for masturbating, where you were even shamed for looking at or touching your genitals, where sex was not even spoken about, you've already been raised with these certain preconditioned or conditioned thoughts around sex. In other words, sex is bad. Sex is not something that we talk about. Sex is shameful. And if you are sexual or desirous or want to have sex, then possibly you are shameful too. This is more so prevalent for women, for gay people, for queer people, for people that don't identify as heterosexual, and for people that don't identify as male. Interestingly enough, heterosexual men in many religions and in our society tend to get more passes when it comes to sexual freedom. So, but even then, like if a man has been shamed, if someone in the act of sex has shamed a man, or we're seeing a lot of it with the Me Too movement happening these days, men can also experience a lot of shame around their sexuality, which can contribute then to this sort of anxiety that we feel around sex. So the other thing I want to mention is toxic masculinity. I've gotten into this argument with many of men who think toxic masculinity is about them, and it's not. Toxic masculinity is the way that we as a culture, as a society, particularly here in the United States, but also in many cultures where it's more of a patriarchy, we experience more toxic masculinity in these cultures. And all that really means is that there are these preconceived notions of what a man should act like, and these preconceived notions of what a woman should act like. So very masculine roles for men and very feminine roles for women. One of the things that I always say is, who owns masculinity and femininity? Men don't own masculinity and women don't own femininity. However, toxic masculinity or toxic femininity really tells us that that's how we need to identify these very extreme ends of the spectrum. So when we start to sort of like peel off all of these layers, if you're working with a therapist, then you really start to understand, like, wow, some of these stories that I've been told, some of the ways that we've been conditioned via society, via my religion, via my parents, via my teachers at school, all of these things have created these stories about our sexuality. Maybe you were teased about some aspect of the way you looked in elementary school, or when you were a little child. Maybe even as a teenager, when you were exploring or experimenting with sexuality, someone said something that really, really hurt your feelings, or that you felt very sensitive about. Add that to the bucket. As we get older, this bucket fills up with negative stories, with shame, with conditioning, all of these things that don't really fit, and then we create these stories around them. And so undoing that is what is required to get rid of the anxiety, the discomfort that you might feel around sex, sexuality, intimacy. Another thing that we often see is people using a lot of alcohol and drugs, particularly in our society. When people are going out on dates, they're drinking. Why do we do that? I think as a society, we feel the need to mask the discomfort that we feel around sex with alcohol and drugs. It's so easy to be sexual and flirtatious and uninhibited when we've had a few drinks or we've done some drugs that sort of take that away. And I think this also is why, addiction is so rampant in our society. We aren't really given the tools to deal with intimacy, to deal with relationships, to deal with sexuality, to deal with a whole gamut of things. And drugs and alcohol make it a lot easier because we weren't given the tools, we weren't given the space, possibly, to even talk about these things. So undoing it requires a lot of in-depth look at some of these old stories and conditioning that you've experienced throughout your life. In my course, I offer a lot of worksheets and opportunities for you to work through these things as you would in a therapist's office, as I do often with my clients in my office. So one of the first things I often encourage people to do is make a list. Start making a list of all of the negative stories you have in your head from your entire life. This is a long list. It's not something that you do in one day. It's not something that you do in 1 month. This is something that you can do over time. But once you take that first step and you're like, oh my gosh, I was told that I'm gonna grow hair on my hands if I masturbate, or oh my God, I thought that I was gonna get sent damned to hell if people knew that I was homosexual. Once you start to slowly uncover these lies, myths that you've heard throughout your life, it's gonna become much easier. So getting the process started is the first and foremost. So getting really clear about how you have been conditioned, trained to feel about sex is really one of the main ways to start undoing it. Other ways of undoing it, including, I always do that. That's the very, very, very first thing. The other thing is, our nervous system, when we're anxious, our heart starts to beat really fast, and that's our nervous system basically telling us we're in danger. Well, you're in a sexual situation, and maybe you're with somebody that you're really into, that you're crushing on, or maybe you see someone and you clam up. Your nervous system's telling you in danger, but you're clearly not in danger. You're just scared because there's so much risk based on everything that you've learned, every experience that you've had, every negative experience that you've had that's felt so uncomfortable. There's so much risk in taking that chance of asking that person out, of making the first move and making out with that person. The rejection could be so severe that it could do a huge number on you. Well, so to sort of soothe our nervous system, breathing is a really, really amazing thing that sort of over time will train our nervous system. Like, hey, this is not a life or death situation. This is a situation in which I'm a little bit scared because I feel like there's a lot of risk, but evolutionarily, there's no tiger chasing after me. Evolutionarily, when we were hunters and gatherers, maybe we would have that elevated heart rate, anxiety, sweaty palms when we were life was in danger. So a lot of these things we've biologically carried over from, more prehistoric times for human beings. And how can we calm ourselves down when something's not a life or death situation? We can practice breathing. And simple breathing practices are like a 4-7-8, which is you inhale for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it for 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then exhale for 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's just one example. I did that really fast. You would do it a little bit slower, and the more you got used to it, the slower you would do it. Slowing down our breathing really makes this feeling of anxiety kind of go down. It also helps us be a little bit more mindful about our actions. This can help with so many different things if we're feeling emotionally reactive, if we're in situations with people where we feel like panicky or we feel so anxious, we're like stumbling over our words. These types of things, the practice of breathing is so profound. So these are two types of things that I strongly encourage, is starting to get clear about the stories that you've heard and getting in touch with your breathing. Beyond that, once you start getting comfortable, then you start adding people into the mix. If you have a friend or a partner or a therapist, you can role play some scenarios. Working with a surrogate partner. Surrogate partner is someone that will actually work in tandem with your therapist, and they can do some of the actual hands-on intimacy work. Working with like a sexological body worker can help you in real time and experientially start to undo some of the anxiety that you feel. Or maybe you're just ready to go out and try it with a person that you've met, or someone that maybe you're already in a relationship. If you're already in a relationship, your partner is the key, is the person that you want to be doing a lot of these exercises with, because they are going to actually help you in real time undo that trauma, undo that religious trauma, undo the trauma that you experienced when you were bullied by someone, or bullied by an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend or partner, or when you were, when someone said something to you that really hurt your feelings. Those are all traumatic experiences. And so essentially, when we undo trauma, doing it with another person is profound, because it gives us what we call a corrective emotional experience, which is what you need to recognize, oh, this story isn't how it always ends. Sometimes it has a positive ending. And the more positive endings that you have, the more opportunity you have to rewrite that story. So that's a little bit about how we deal with sexual, intimate anxiety, either in sexual situations or in dating. Getting real with yourself, learning how to calm your nervous system down with breathing, and then doing it in real time with either a friend, a partner, a therapist, a sexological body worker, or surrogate partner, and slowly undoing the stories that you've learned and you've told. In therapy, it can take time to do it. In my online course, you can do it yourself for pennies on the dollar, and I'll definitely put the links to my online courses down below. So I would love to see you over there. Again, subscribe to the Sex Talk if you haven't already, and I will be back soon. Take care.
Sex Talk.